She woke with a start, head pounding and mouth dry as cotton. Unfamiliar ceiling. Unfamiliar bed. Unfamiliar room. Her black dress from last night's company party was neatly folded on a chair nearby, not crumpled on the floor where she would have left it in her drunken state. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt that didn't belong to her. When she tried to sit up, the room spun violently, and she fell back onto pillows that smelled of unfamiliar laundry detergent. Then it hit her. This was James's apartment. James, her young assistant who had offered to drive her home when she couldn't stand straight. James, who reported directly to her. James, who she had yelled at just last week for missing a deadline. She was in her employee's bed with no memory of how she got there, and a board meeting in. She frantically looked around for a clock. 2 hours. This wasn't just embarrassing. This could cost her everything. The night before had started like any other company celebration. The whole marketing department gathered at the Oasis, the fancy downtown bar with signature cocktails that cost more than lunch. They were celebrating landing the Peterson account, the biggest client their firm had ever signed. As department head, she had given a speech, praised her team, and even authorized an open bar, a decision she now deeply regretted. She remembered knocking back those colorful martinis, feeling on top of the world. The music was good, the team was happy, and for once, all the stress of being the only black female executive in the company seemed to melt away. Until it didn't. Until Mark from accounting made that comment about how surprising it was that she had landed the account. Until she had another drink to wash down the familiar sting of backhanded compliments. James had been watching from across the room. She remembered that much. His concerned expression as she told off Mark. His gentle suggestion that maybe they should call it a night. His hand steadying her elbow as she wobbled on her heels. Ms. Jackson? A soft knock at the bedroom door jolted her back to the present crisis. Are you awake? I made coffee. She pulled the blanket up higher, mortified. Yes, she managed to croak. I'm awake. The door opened slightly, but James didn't enter. There's aspirin and water on the nightstand. Your clothes are clean. I can drive you home whenever you're ready, or to the office if you prefer. Home. Office. Neither option seemed right. What had happened last night? Had she crossed a line with an employee? Had he taken advantage of her drunken state? The power dynamics alone made her stomach churn, or maybe that was just the hangover. James, she called, her voice stronger now, fueled by rising panic. I need to know what happened last night. There was a pause. Nothing happened, Ms. Jackson. You were sick. I couldn't get your address from you. I brought you here and slept on the couch. That's all. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But the gaps in her memory haunted her. And even if he was telling the truth, how could she face her team after they'd seen her that way? How could she maintain her authority when she had shown such poor judgment? With trembling hands, she reached for the water and aspirin. As she did, she noticed her phone beside them, plugged in and charging. There were 17 missed calls, 15 from her sister and 2 from the company's CEO. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was her career, her reputation, the authority she had fought so hard to build, all potentially ruined because of one night. She picked up her phone and saw a text from her sister. Where are you? Mom's in the hospital. Call me ASAP. Then another text, this one from the CEO. Need to discuss Peterson account before the board meeting. Client called with concerns. The room seemed to close in around her. Her personal life and professional life were both spiraling out of control, and she was trapped in her assistant's apartment, unable to think clearly through the fog of her hangover. James, she called out, her voice breaking slightly. I think I'm in big trouble. She didn't know it yet, but the trouble she faced was nothing compared to what was coming. The Peterson account. Her mother's health. And most unexpectedly, the way her relationship with James would change everything she thought she knew about trust, power, and second chances. Through the thin walls, she could hear James moving around in the kitchen, the soft clink of mugs, the aroma of strong coffee drifting under the door. She needed that coffee desperately. She needed to pull herself together. She needed to be the strong, capable executive everyone expected her to be. But first, she needed to figure out how to look her assistant in the eye without dying of shame. With a deep breath, she swung her legs over the side of the bed. Whatever happened next, she would face it with as much dignity as she could muster. She was no stranger to challenges. She had fought her way up the corporate ladder against all odds. This was just another obstacle to overcome. Or so she told herself as she reached for her neatly folded dress and tried to piece together the fragments of the night before. James stood in his small kitchen, nervously arranging and rearranging mugs on the counter. He had barely slept, spending most of the night checking on Miss Jackson to make sure she was breathing normally. He'd never seen her like that before, vulnerable, unguarded, so different from the powerhouse who strode through the office making decisive calls and keeping everyone on their toes. Last night had been a mess. He remembered watching her throughout the evening, noticing how each drink seemed to wash away a layer of her professional armor. He had seen the exchange with Mark from accounting, had seen the flash of hurt in her eyes before she masked it with another sip of her drink. When she started swaying on her feet during a conversation with the creative team, he knew someone needed to step in. The trouble began when he tried to get her address. In the back of the Uber, she had mumbled something incoherent, then promptly fallen asleep on his shoulder. The driver had looked at him expectantly through the rearview mirror. Where to, man? James had tried to wake her, gently at first, then with more urgency, but she was out cold. Miss Jackson? Miss Jackson, I need your address. Nothing. Just the steady rise and fall of her chest and the faint smell of her perfume mixed with alcohol. He had scrolled through her phone contacts looking for family, but it was locked. No way to call anyone who might know where she lived. No way to get her home safely. So he had made the decision that now had him pacing his kitchen, wondering if he was about to lose his job. My place, he had told the driver, giving his address across town. Once there, he had half-carried, half-guided her up to his fifth-floor walk-up. She had roused briefly at the stairs, muttering complaints about her heels, then leaned heavily on him as they made the slow climb. Inside his apartment, she had looked around with unfocused eyes. Bathroom, she had mumbled urgently, and he had quickly directed her there, where she had promptly been sick. He had waited outside the door, wincing at the sounds until there was silence. Miss Jackson? He had called, knocking softly. When there was no answer, he had eased the door open to find her slumped against the wall, eyes closed. With as much respect as possible, he had helped her clean up, given her one of his t-shirts to sleep in, turning his back while she changed with fumbling movements, and settled her in his bed. He had left water, aspirin, and a trash can within easy reach, then retreated to his lumpy couch with a spare blanket. Throughout the night, he had checked on her regularly, worried about alcohol poisoning. Each time, he found her sleeping soundly, her normally stern expression softened in sleep. Now, in the harsh light of morning, he had to face his boss and explain all of this without making either of them more uncomfortable than necessary. He heard her moving around in his bedroom and took a deep breath. Time to face the music. Miss Jackson emerged from his bedroom looking remarkably put together for someone who had been in such bad shape just hours before. She was back in her black dress, her hair smoothed as best she could manage, her expression carefully neutral despite the shadow of pain behind her eyes. "Good morning," he said, offering her a mug of coffee. She took it without meeting his eyes. "Thank you," she said stiffly. "For the coffee and for last night, I suppose?" "No problem at all." He tried to sound casual, professional. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," she admitted, sipping the coffee. "But I'll survive." She glanced at her phone. "I won't be able to make it home before the board meeting. Is there any chance you could give me a ride directly to the office?" "Of course." An awkward silence fell between them. He could see her struggling with what to say next, how to address the elephant in the room. "James," she finally said, her voice suddenly all business. "I need to be completely clear on what happened last night. My memory is not reliable." He nodded, understanding the real question beneath her words. "You had too much to drink at the party. I offered to help you get home, but you couldn't give me your address. You fell asleep in the Uber. I brought you here because I didn't know what else to do. You got sick, I helped you clean up, gave you something comfortable to sleep in, and let you take my bed. I slept on the couch. That's the entire story." She studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. "Nothing else." "Nothing else," he confirmed firmly. "I would never take advantage of that situation, Miss Jackson." She nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "I believe you." Then, after another sip of coffee, "Please call me Tony. After throwing up in your bathroom, I think we're on a first-name basis." He smiled, relieved. "Tony then." Her phone buzzed again, and the momentary lightness vanished from her face. "My mother's in the hospital," she said almost to herself. "And there's some issue with the Peterson account. I need to get to that board meeting." "I can have you there in 20 minutes, James promised. "And?" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "I know it's not my place, but if you need to go see your mom instead, I could cover for you at the meeting. Take notes at least." She looked surprised by the offer, then thoughtful. "That's kind, but no. I need to handle this personally." She straightened her shoulders. once again becoming the formidable executive he was used to seeing in the office. "Let's go." As they drove to the office, Tony stared out the window, her mind racing. The embarrassment of waking up in James's apartment was now the least of her worries. Her mother's health had been declining for months, but she'd been stable. What had happened? And what was going on with the Peterson account? Had the client gotten cold feet? Had someone on her team made a mistake? And why was her sister calling so insistently? They weren't exactly close these days. James glanced over at her occasionally, concerned. "Do you want to talk about any of it?" he asked quietly. She nearly brushed him off with her usual professional distance, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the lingering vulnerability of the morning, or the simple kindness he had shown her when she was at her worst. "My mother has heart problems," she said finally. "She's been stable for a while, but—" She shook her head. "And my sister and I don't exactly see eye to eye on her care. Lisa thinks I work too much, that I should be more involved." She didn't add that her sister's accusations hit a nerve because they were partly true. James nodded but didn't push for more. "As for Peterson," she continued, shifting to more comfortable professional ground, "I have no idea what's going on there. We nailed that presentation." They were thrilled. "We did nail it," James agreed. "Whatever it is, we'll fix it." She looked at him curiously. "We?" He flushed slightly. "You and the team, I mean." But something in his simple inclusion, the easy assumption that they were in this together, touched her unexpectedly. When was the last time anyone had been on her side like that? Had she pushed everyone away in her climb to the top? As they pulled into the office parking garage, Tony felt a strange mix of dread and determination. Whatever awaited her upstairs, judgment from her team about her behavior last night, bad news about the Peterson account, the board's scrutiny, she would face it. And somehow, knowing James was behind her made it seem slightly less daunting. Tony slipped into the boardroom 1 minute before the meeting was scheduled to begin. She had stopped in the restroom on her way up, ensuring her appearance was as impeccable as possible under the circumstances, a splash of cold water, emergency makeup from her purse, hair tied back neatly. Her head still throbbed and her stomach churned, but she'd be damned if she let anyone see her sweat. The room fell silent as she entered, 12 pairs of eyes turning to watch her walk to her seat. She nodded professionally at the CEO, Richard Winters, who gave her a tight smile in return. "Cutting it close, Antonia," he remarked as she settled her materials in front of her. "Traffic," she replied smoothly, ignoring the racing of her heart. Did he know about last night? Had someone seen her leave with James? Richard stood to begin the meeting, launching into his usual opening remarks about quarterly projections and market trends. Tony tried to focus, but her phone was burning a hole in her pocket. She needed to call her sister to find out what was happening with their mother. She needed to check on the Peterson account issue before the topic came up in the meeting. She needed about 12 more aspirin. "And now Antonia will update us on the Peterson account," Richard announced, jolting her back to attention. All eyes turned to her expectantly. She took a steadying breath and opened her folder. "The Peterson team was extremely pleased with our initial presentation," she began confidently. "They've signed the preliminary agreement and—" "I'm afraid there's been a development," Richard interrupted, his expression grim. "Peterson called this morning. They're having second thoughts." The room grew silent. Tony felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Second thoughts? About what aspect specifically? Richard slid a paper across the table to her. "They seem to think our strategy lacks innovation. They're considering other options." Tony scanned the email printout, her mind racing. This made no sense. The Peterson team had been enthusiastic, particularly about the innovative approach her team had developed. What had changed? "I don't understand," she said, looking up at Richard. "They specifically praised our innovation during the presentation." From the other end of the table, Marcus Chin, head of the digital division and her longtime competitor for senior positions, cleared his throat. "Perhaps they were just being polite in the moment," he suggested, not bothering to hide his satisfaction at her predicament. "It can be hard to gauge genuine interest sometimes." The implication was clear. She had misread the room, misunderstood the client's needs. But Tony knew better. She had years of experience reading clients, and the Peterson team had been genuinely excited. Something else was going on. "What exactly did they say when they called?" she asked Richard directly. Richard hesitated. "They spoke with Marcus, actually. He has a previous connection with their CMO." Tony's eyes snapped to Marcus, who smiled blandly. Of course. The pieces fell into place. Marcus had been gunning for her position for years, always just a step behind her in the corporate climb. He must have reached out to Peterson behind her back, planted seeds of doubt. I see, she said carefully. And what solution did Marcus propose to this sudden concern? Richard looked uncomfortable. Marcus suggested that his team could take another look at the strategy, perhaps offer a fresh perspective. With all due respect, Tony said, her voice steady despite her rising anger, my team worked directly with Peterson for weeks to develop this strategy. We understand their needs and their market. Before we start overhauling our approach based on one phone call, I'd like to speak with them directly. Several board members nodded in agreement, but Marcus leaned forward. Time is of the essence, Tony. We can't risk losing this account because of pride. This isn't about pride, she countered, her hangover forgotten in the heat of the moment. This is about understanding what's really going on with the client. Something doesn't add up. She could feel Richard studying her, weighing the situation. Finally he nodded. Tony's right. Before we change course, she should speak directly with Peterson. He checked his watch. Can you call them immediately after this meeting? Absolutely, Tony agreed, relief washing through her. At least she had bought some time. The meeting continued, moving on to other topics, but Tony remained on edge. Her phone vibrated again in her pocket. Her sister, no doubt. And now she had the Peterson situation to sort out. Plus, she still needed to face her team after last night's embarrassing display. When the meeting finally adjourned, Tony gathered her things quickly, intending to find a private spot to call both her sister and the Peterson team. But Richard caught her arm as she tried to exit. A word, Tony, he said quietly, steering her to a corner of the now emptying boardroom. She braced herself, expecting questions about the Peterson account or perhaps a warning about Marcus's obvious maneuvering. Instead, Richard's voice dropped to a concerned murmur. Are you all right? You don't seem yourself today. The question caught her off guard. Richard wasn't known for his personal touch. I'm fine, she said automatically. Just a lot on my plate. He studied her face. You know, Marcus came to me this morning with some concerns. Her heart sank. What kind of concerns? He mentioned that you seemed impaired at the celebration last night, that you left with a junior employee. So there it was. Marcus had wasted no time trying to use last night against her. I had a few drinks, she acknowledged calmly. James Reynolds, my assistant, helped me get a ride home. That's all there is to it. Richard nodded slowly. Tony, you know I value your work. You've been instrumental in growing this company. But appearances matter. The board watches these things. I understand, she said stiffly, humiliation burning through her. It won't happen again. Good. He patted her shoulder awkwardly. Get the Peterson situation sorted out and we'll put this behind us. As he walked away, Tony stood frozen, fury and shame warring within her. Marcus was playing dirty, using her one night of weakness against her. And now, on top of everything else, her professional reputation was at stake. Her phone vibrated again and this time she pulled it out. 23 missed calls from her sister. 3 from the hospital. And a text from James. Peterson's CMO and Marcus had dinner last night. Overheard creative team talking about it. She stared at the message. So Marcus had been undermining her directly. This wasn't just opportunism. This was sabotage. Tony straightened her shoulders. She needed to call her sister, check on her mother, deal with the Peterson situation, and somehow salvage her reputation. All while nursing the worst hangover of her life. As she headed for her office, she saw James waiting nearby, his expression concerned. Despite everything, she felt a flicker of gratitude. At least someone was on her side. Peterson first, then my family, she told him, her voice all business again. I need you to pull all our presentation materials and notes from the client meetings. And find out everything you can about when and where Marcus met with their CMO. James nodded. Already on it. For the first time that day, Tony felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could fix this mess after all. While James gathered the Peterson materials, Tony closed her office door and finally called her sister. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed, the weight of 23 missed calls hanging heavy on her conscience. Lisa answered on the first ring. Finally, her sister exclaimed, tension crackling through the phone. Where have you been? I've been calling all night. I'm sorry, Tony said, closing her eyes against the stab of guilt. My phone was... I couldn't get to it. What's happening with Mom? There was a pause, filled with the ambient sounds of a hospital, beeping machines, distant announcements over the PA system. When Lisa spoke again, her voice was tight with controlled anger. She had another episode last night. Worse than before. They're saying she needs surgery, Tony. Soon. Tony sank into her chair, the office around her suddenly seeming unimportant, distant. Surgery? What kind? Heart valve replacement. The medication isn't working anymore. Lisa's voice softened slightly. She's stable now, but they want to operate tomorrow morning. I'll be there as soon as I can, Tony promised. Which hospital? Memorial. Cardiac unit. Another pause. She's been asking for you. The simple statement hit Tony like a physical blow. Despite their complicated relationship, despite the way she had disappointed her mother over the years, choosing career over family, moving away, the endless arguments about her priorities, her mother still wanted her there. Still needed her. Tell her I'm coming, Tony said, her professional mask cracking slightly. Tell her I love her. You should tell her yourself, Lisa replied, but her tone had lost some of its edge. Just get here when you can. After hanging up, Tony sat motionless, staring at the framed photo on her desk, herself and her mother at Tony's college graduation, both smiling, full of hope for the future. Before the arguments about Tony moving away for her career. Before the disappointment in her mother's eyes when Tony missed holidays for work emergencies. Before the gradual drift that had left them polite strangers who loved each other from a distance. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. James entered with an armful of folders and a determined expression. I've got everything on Peterson, he announced, then faltered as he caught sight of her face. What's wrong? For a moment, Tony considered maintaining her professional distance, brushing off his concern with a brisk deflection. But after everything that had happened, him seeing her at her worst, helping her when she needed it most, the old wall seemed pointless. My mother needs heart surgery, she said simply. Tomorrow morning. James set the folders down and took the seat across from her desk. I'm sorry, he said, and she was struck by the genuine concern in his voice. Is there anything I can do? She gestured to the folders. Help me fix this Peterson mess quickly so I can get to the hospital. He nodded, all business now, understanding her need to focus on what she could control. I did some digging. Marcus definitely met with Peterson's CMO last night at Caravaggio's, that fancy Italian place downtown. They were there for almost 3 hours. Tony's jaw tightened. While we were all celebrating at the Oasis. Convenient timing. Very, James agreed. And I found something else. He pulled out a printout from one of the folders. This is from their company blog posted this morning. They're announcing a new direction for their brand identity, one that conflicts with the strategy we presented. Tony scanned the post, her initial confusion giving way to understanding. They're preempting our campaign. Whatever Marcus said to them must have convinced them our approach wouldn't align with this new direction. She looked up at James. But we never even heard about this pivot during our meetings with them. Because it's new, James confirmed. Brand new. The timestamp on their internal document announcing this change was yesterday at 4 p.m. After our final presentation, but before the celebration. Tony connected the dots. So Marcus found out about this shift somehow, approached their CMO at dinner, and convinced them we couldn't adapt our strategy to match their new direction. Exactly. She stood, energy surging through her despite the lingering hangover. I need to call them right now. We can adapt our approach. We just need to show them how our core strategy still works with their new direction. As she reached for the phone, James held up a hand. Wait. There's one more thing. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to find something. I had Kenny from the design team send me this. It's a photo from last night. He handed her his phone and she froze. The photo showed her at the bar, clearly intoxicated, gesturing dramatically while telling some story. James was visible in the background, watching with concern. Marcus has been showing this around the office, James said quietly. Suggesting you were unprofessional. Tony stared at the image, mortification washing through her anew. Fantastic, she muttered. So I need to save our biggest account while defending my professional reputation and somehow get to the hospital to see my mother before her surgery. Not alone, James said firmly. I can help. She looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. In the 2 years he'd worked as her assistant, she had appreciated his efficiency, his attention to detail, his ability to anticipate her needs. But she had never fully acknowledged his loyalty, his kindness, the quiet way he made her life easier every day. Why? She asked suddenly. Why are you helping me like this? After how I treated you last night, after how I've been as a boss, always demanding, rarely grateful. James seemed surprised by the question. Because you're good at what you do, he said simply. Because you've taught me more in 2 years than I learned in 4 years of college. Because you deserve better than to be undermined by someone like Marcus. He paused, then added, and because everyone needs someone in their corner sometimes. Something shifted between them in that moment, not romantic, not yet, but a new understanding, a deeper connection than boss and employee. For the first time, Tony saw him not just as her capable assistant but as a person who genuinely cared about her well-being. "Thank you," she said softly, the words unfamiliar on her tongue. He nodded, then gestured to the phone. "Let's call Peterson." Over the next hour, they worked together seamlessly, Tony speaking with the Peterson team while James pulled up relevant materials and passed her notes. She acknowledged their new direction, validated their concerns, and then systematically demonstrated how their original strategy could be adapted to support the pivot. By the end of the call, the Peterson CMO was apologizing for the confusion and reaffirming their commitment to working with Tony's team. As she hung up, triumph replaced the day's earlier disasters. "They're staying with us," she told James, who broke into a wide smile. "They want a revised proposal by the end of the week, but they're on board." "That's amazing," he said. "You were brilliant." She shook her head. "We were brilliant. I couldn't have done it without your research." She glanced at the clock. 3 p.m. already. "I need to get to the hospital," she said, gathering her things. "Can you let Richard know about Peterson? And maybe start pulling together notes for the revised proposal?" "Consider it done," James assured her. "And Tony? Your mom's going to be okay." The simple reassurance, offered without obligation or expectation, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, nodded her thanks and headed for the door. As she waited for the elevator, her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Marcus tells me you lost Peterson. Is this true?" She smiled grimly and typed back, "Peterson is fully committed to working with my team. Perhaps Marcus should check his information before spreading rumors. I'll brief you tomorrow on the revised approach." The elevator doors opened, and as she stepped inside, she felt a curious lightness despite the challenges still ahead. The Peterson account was secure. Her professional reputation would recover. Now she just needed to face her family and the medical crisis waiting at the hospital. As the elevator descended, she realized something else had changed. For the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone in her struggles. James's steady support had reminded her what it felt like to have someone on her side, to share the burden rather than carrying everything herself. It was a strange feeling, vulnerability mixed with strength, dependence intertwined with independence. She wasn't sure what to make of it yet, but as she stepped out into the afternoon sunshine, heading for her car and the hospital beyond, she knew one thing for certain. The trouble she had woken up to this morning had transformed into something unexpected. Something that might, just possibly, lead to positive change. Memorial Hospital's cardiac unit was a maze of hushed corridors and gentle beeping monitors. Tony followed a nurse's directions to her mother's room, rehearsing what she would say, how she would explain her absence during yet another family crisis. The familiar guilt pressed down on her shoulders as she approached room 412. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Her mother, Eleanor Jackson, looked small in the hospital bed, her normally proud posture diminished by tubes and monitors. Lisa sat beside her, head bent over her phone, her free hand holding their mother's. Neither noticed Tony immediately. "Hey," Tony said softly, stepping into the room. Both women looked up. Lisa's expression flickered between relief and lingering annoyance, but her mother's face brightened with unmistakable joy. "Antonia," Eleanor said, her voice weaker than Tony remembered. "You came." Tony moved to the bedside, taking her mother's other hand. "Of course I came. I'm sorry it took so long." Lisa stood, stretching. "I'll give you 2 a minute," she said, shooting Tony a look that clearly communicated they would talk later. As she passed, she squeezed Tony's arm briefly, a silent acknowledgement of shared concern beneath their differences. Once they were alone, Tony pulled the chair closer to the bed. "How are you feeling?" Eleanor gave a small smile. "Like my heart is giving out. But other than that, not too bad." Her eyes searched Tony's face. "You look tired, baby. Everything okay at work?" It was so typical of her mother to be concerned about Tony's well-being even from a hospital bed. "Work is fine," Tony assured her. "Just a busy day. Nothing for you to worry about." Eleanor's grip tightened slightly on Tony's hand. "They want to crack open my chest tomorrow," she said, her direct manner unchanged by illness. "Replace a valve." "I know," Tony said. "Lisa told me. I'll be here. I'll take time off work." Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or disbelief. "You don't have to do that. I know how important your job is." The words carried no obvious bitterness, but Tony felt their weight nonetheless. The history of missed birthdays and abbreviated holiday visits, the promotions that had always seemed to take precedence over family events. "You're more important," Tony said firmly, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "The job will still be there." Eleanor studied her daughter's face. "Something's different about you today," she observed. "What happened?" Tony considered deflecting, giving some vague answer about perspective or priorities. But sitting here, faced with her mother's mortality, the corporate games and professional posturing suddenly seemed absurd. Without quite meaning to, she found herself telling the truth. "I messed up, Mom. Got drunk at a work party. Made a fool of myself. My assistant had to take care of me." She shook her head, embarrassed even in the telling. "I woke up in his apartment with no memory of how I got there, missed your calls, nearly lost our biggest client, and almost tanked my reputation, all in one day." She expected disappointment, perhaps a lecture about responsibility. Instead, Eleanor laughed, a genuine, if wheezy, laugh that ended in a cough. "Sounds like quite a day," she said when she recovered. "And this assistant, he took care of you? Nothing inappropriate?" "No," Tony said quickly. "James was a gentleman. He's been helping me clean up the mess today too." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like a good man." "He is," Tony agreed, then added hastily, "a good employee, I mean. Reliable." Her mother's eyes twinkled knowingly, but she didn't press the point. Instead, she said, "Maybe this mess, as you call it, is exactly what you needed." Tony frowned. "What do you mean?" "Baby, you've spent so many years building those walls around yourself. Being the strong one, the independent one, never letting anyone see a crack in that perfect image." Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. "Sometimes we need to fall apart a little to remember we're human. To let others see we need help sometimes." The words hit uncomfortably close to home. "I've had to be strong," Tony defended, "to get where I am." "I know," Eleanor interrupted. "Lord knows I know what you've had to do, what you've had to be. A black woman in that white man's world. I've always been proud of your strength." She squeezed Tony's hand. "But strength isn't the same as isolation, Antonia. And perfection isn't the same as happiness." Tony felt tears threatening again, this time harder to blink away. "When did you get so wise?" she asked, trying for lightness. "Around the time they told me my heart was failing," Eleanor replied with a sad smile. "Nothing clarifies your thinking like knowing your time might be limited." Tony felt a sharp pain at the thought of losing her mother. Despite their differences, despite the distance that had grown between them, Eleanor was her rock, her foundation. "You're going to be fine," she insisted. "The surgery will work." "Maybe," Eleanor agreed, neither confirming nor denying. "But either way, I won't regret speaking my truth." She studied Tony's face again. "This assistant of yours, James. Tell me about him." The sudden change of subject caught Tony off guard. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you think is important." Tony considered the question, finding herself wanting to give a real answer rather than a dismissive one. "He's smart, efficient, always prepared. He notices things other people miss." She paused, then added, "He saw I was drinking too much last night before I realized it myself. He stepped in when no one else would. And today he helped me save the Peterson account when anyone else would have just watched me fail." "Sounds like he cares about you," Eleanor observed. "He cares about his job," Tony corrected automatically. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "If you say so." Before Tony could respond, the door opened and Lisa returned, followed by a doctor in scrubs. "Dr. Patel wants to go over the procedure for tomorrow," Lisa explained. The next hour was consumed with medical details, the surgery process, recovery expectations, risks and benefits. Tony took detailed notes, asked clarifying questions, and made sure both she and Lisa understood everything. It was familiar territory for her, gathering information, analyzing options, making plans. The business skills that had carried her to the top of her profession now served her well in this personal crisis. By the time Dr. Patel left, visiting hours were nearly over. "You should get some rest, Mom," Tony said, standing and stretching her stiff back. "We'll be here first thing tomorrow." "Both of you go home and sleep," Eleanor instructed, her maternal authority undiminished by her condition. "Lisa, you've been here all day. And Tony, you look dead on your feet." Lisa gathered her things, kissing their mother's forehead. "I'll be back at 6 a.m., she promised. Tony leaned down for her own goodbye, suddenly overwhelmed by how fragile her mother felt in her arms. "I love you, Mom," she whispered, the words thick in her throat. "I love you too, baby," Eleanor replied. And Tony? Remember what I said. Let people help you sometimes. In the hospital corridor, Lisa and Tony walked in silence toward the elevator. There was tension between them, years of disagreements and different life choices creating an invisible barrier. Lisa had stayed local, married her high school sweetheart, had 3 kids who adored their grandmother. Tony had moved away, climbed the corporate ladder, built a successful career but few deep relationships. In Lisa's eyes, Tony had abandoned their mother. In Tony's view, Lisa had never understood her ambition. You missed 23 calls, Lisa said finally as they waited for the elevator. It wasn't a question. My phone was charging. I didn't hear it, Tony replied, not ready to explain the whole messy truth to her sister. Lisa's expression made it clear she didn't fully believe this. Whatever. You're here now. The elevator arrived and they stepped inside. As the doors closed, Lisa spoke again, her voice softer. She's been asking for you all day, you know? Worried you'd be upset about missing work for her surgery. Guilt squeezed Tony's chest. I've given her reason to think that, I guess. Lisa glanced over, surprised by the admission. Yeah, you have. Then after a pause, but you're here now. That's what matters. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was an olive branch. Tony took it gratefully. I'm going to do better, Lisa. I promise. As they reached the hospital lobby, Lisa checked her watch. I need to get home to the kids. Where are you staying? Your old room is still available at Mom's. Tony hesitated. She hadn't thought that far ahead. A hotel seemed cold and impersonal given the circumstances, but staying in her childhood bedroom felt like stepping too far back into a past she'd worked hard to escape. I'll figure something out, she said vaguely. Lisa raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Surgery's at 8 a.m. Don't be late. I won't be, Tony promised. As Lisa headed for her car, Tony stood in the fading evening light, suddenly uncertain. She pulled out her phone, intending to search for nearby hotels, but instead found herself looking at a text from James. Peterson proposal draft is underway. How's your mom? The simple question, evidence that he had remembered and cared about her personal crisis amid the work chaos, warmed her unexpectedly. Without overthinking it, she called him. Tony? He answered, sounding surprised. Everything okay? Yes, she said, then amended. Well, as okay as it can be. Mom's having surgery tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, he said, and again she was struck by the genuine concern in his voice. Is there anything I can do? She almost said no automatically, her habitual self-sufficiency kicking in. But her mother's words echoed in her mind. Let people help you sometimes. Actually, she said, the words feeling foreign in her mouth, I could use some help. I need a place to stay tonight, near the hospital. I don't really want to check into a hotel alone. There was a brief pause, and Tony immediately regretted the request. It was inappropriate, crossing professional boundaries, especially after last night's debacle. She was his boss, not his friend, and certainly not. My apartment is only 10 minutes from Memorial, James said, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. The couch is yours if you want it. Or I can take the couch this time, give you the bed. Relief flooded through her. The couch is fine, she assured him quickly. Are you sure it's not an imposition? Not at all, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Besides, I owe you dinner after last night's drama. I'm making pasta. You cook. Just because I'm a bachelor doesn't mean I survive on takeout, he teased. Give me your location and I'll pick you up. As she waited in front of the hospital, Tony marveled at how much had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday she had been the untouchable executive, isolated by her success and her own carefully constructed walls. Today she had nearly lost it all, her job, her reputation, her biggest client, and paradoxically felt more human than she had in years. And then there was James. Her efficient, professional assistant had become something else. A support, a confidant, perhaps even a friend. It was terrifying and comforting all at once. When his modest sedan pulled up, Tony slid into the passenger seat with a grateful smile. Thanks for this, she said simply. Anytime, he replied, pulling back into traffic. Now tell me about your mom. What happened today? As they drove through the darkening city, Tony found herself telling him everything. Not just about her mother's condition, but about her complicated relationship with her family, the gulf between her and her sister, the guilt she carried for prioritizing work over the people she loved. James listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions, expressing concern without pity. By the time they reached his apartment, Tony felt lighter somehow, as if sharing the burden had actually diminished it rather than making her appear weak. Inside, the apartment looked different in the evening light, cozier, more lived in than she had noticed that morning. Books lined the shelves, plants sat in the windows, and the smell of garlic and herbs filled the air from whatever he had started cooking before picking her up. "Make yourself at home," James offered, heading to the kitchen. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. Tony wandered to his bookshelves, curious about what she would find. Management theory? Business biographies? Instead, she found literature, classics mixed with contemporary fiction, philosophy, history, poetry. A more complex picture of the man she thought she knew began to form. "Wine," James called from the kitchen. She started to accept automatically, then remembered the previous night's disaster. "Better not," she replied ruefully. "I think I've had enough for a while." He appeared in the doorway, drying his hands on a towel. "Smart choice. I have sparkling water with lime." "Very sophisticated." She laughed, surprised by how natural it felt. When was the last time she had really laughed? "Perfect." As James returned to his cooking, Tony continued exploring his living space, noting the details that revealed the person behind the efficient assistant she knew from work. The guitar in the corner. The framed hiking photos. The stacks of books with marked pages, evidence of an active, curious mind. "I didn't know you played," she said when he emerged with 2 plates of what looked like homemade pasta with aromatic sauce. He glanced at the guitar. "Since college? I'm not very good, but it relaxes me." "I'd like to hear you play sometime," she said without thinking, then felt awkward at the presumption of future social interaction. But James just smiled. "Maybe after dinner, if you don't mind amateur strumming." They ate at his small dining table, the conversation flowing easily from work to books to music to family. Tony found herself sharing stories about her childhood, her mother's strength as a single parent, her early ambitions. James talked about growing up in a small town, his love of literature, his dreams of eventually writing a novel. "Why are you working as an assistant?" she asked, genuinely curious. "With your intelligence, your education, you could be doing so much more." He considered the question thoughtfully. "I wanted to learn the business from the ground up," he said finally. "And working for you? Well, you're the best in the industry. I've learned more watching you navigate that corporate battleground than I could have in any other position." She felt unexpected pleasure at the compliment. "Even after seeing me at my worst?" "Especially then," he said seriously. "Anyone can look good when everything's going right. Character shows in how you handle the hard days." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, a possibility that hadn't existed before. Tony broke the gaze first, suddenly aware of how intimate the dinner felt, how far beyond professional their relationship had ventured in just 24 hours. "I should get some sleep," she said, rising to help clear the table. "Early morning tomorrow." James nodded, accepting her retreat without comment. "I'll get you some blankets for the couch." Later, lying in the dark on James's surprisingly comfortable couch, Tony stared at the ceiling, her mind racing despite her exhaustion. Tomorrow her mother would undergo major surgery. Her career still hung in a precarious balance, with Marcus undoubtedly plotting his next move. And here she was, in her assistant's apartment for the second night in a row, confused by the warmth she felt in his presence. Life had seemed so straightforward yesterday morning: climb the corporate ladder, prove herself in a world that doubted her, protect herself by keeping everyone at arm's length. Now everything was upended, and she wasn't sure if she was in trouble or finally breaking free. As she drifted towards sleep, her mother's words returned to her. "Sometimes we need to fall apart a little to remember we're human." Maybe, Tony thought as consciousness slipped away, that was exactly what was happening. Maybe falling apart wasn't the disaster she had always feared, but the beginning of something new, something real, something worth the risk. The hospital waiting room was a study in controlled anxiety. Tony sat ramrod straight in an uncomfortable plastic chair, Lisa slouched beside her, both women staring at the clock on the wall as if they could make time move faster through sheer force of will. They had been there since 7 a.m., had watched as their mother was taken into pre-op, had listened to Dr. Patel's final reassurances about the procedure. Now there was nothing to do but wait. "You look better than yesterday," Lisa commented, breaking the tense silence. "Less hungover." Tony glanced over sharply. "That obvious, huh?" Lisa's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Only to someone who's known you your whole life. That and your assistant called me." "James called you?" Tony couldn't hide her surprise. "Yesterday morning. Said he couldn't find your address in your phone, wanted to know if I had it." Lisa studied her sister's face. "He seemed worried about you." Tony didn't know how to respond to that. The idea that James had tried to get her home safely, had reached out to her family when he couldn't, touched her deeply. He's been helpful, she said finally. Lisa raised an eyebrow. Just helpful. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, Lisa said innocently. Just that you stayed at his place 2 nights in a row, and you're being defensive about it. The first night wasn't exactly planned, Tony pointed out. And last night was just convenient, being close to the hospital. Lisa's expression made it clear she wasn't buying it. So there's nothing going on between you two? Of course not, Tony said firmly. He works for me. It would be completely inappropriate. Lisa shrugged. If you say so. But you know, Tony, not everything in life has to follow corporate protocol. Sometimes people just connect. The conversation was veering into uncomfortable territory. Tony checked her watch, grateful for the distraction. It's been 2 hours. Shouldn't we have heard something by now? As if on cue, Dr. Patel appeared in the waiting room doorway, still in surgical scrubs. Both women stood immediately, tension radiating from them as they tried to read his expression. Your mother is in recovery, he said with a reassuring smile. The surgery went well. We replaced the valve and everything looks good. Relief crashed over Tony in a physical wave, making her knees weak. She reached out instinctively and Lisa caught her hand, squeezing it tightly, the first genuinely affectionate contact between them in years. When can we see her? Lisa asked. She'll be in recovery for another hour or so, then move to ICU for monitoring. You can see her briefly once she's settled. But I should warn you, she'll be heavily sedated and might not be very responsive. They nodded their understanding and Dr. Patel left to check on another patient. Tony and Lisa sank back into their chairs, the shared relief temporarily bridging the gap between them. She's going to be okay, Lisa said as if saying it aloud would make it more real. Yeah, Tony agreed, her voice thick with emotion. She's tough. They sat in more comfortable silence for a few minutes before Lisa spoke again. I'm sorry for being hard on you yesterday. About the calls and everything. I was scared and took it out on you. The apology surprised Tony. It's okay. You had reason to be upset. Still, Lisa persisted, Mom's right. We're all we've got now. We should try to be on the same team. Tony nodded, thinking of all the years of tension, the accumulated misunderstandings and judgments. I'd like that, she said honestly. And I meant what I said yesterday. I'm going to do better. Be around more. I'll believe it when I see it, Lisa replied, but her tone was teasing rather than accusatory. Starting with Thanksgiving this year. No excuses about last-minute client emergencies. Deal? Tony agreed with a smile. Then, feeling brave in this moment of reconciliation, she added, and maybe you could try to understand that my work isn't just about ambition or running away. It's part of who I am, something I'm proud of. Lisa considered this, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. I can work on that. The moment was interrupted by Tony's phone buzzing. She checked the screen to see a text from Richard. Board wants update on Peterson. Available for call in 30 minutes? Reality intruded on the family bubble. There was still a crisis at work that needed handling, a career to protect. Normally, Tony wouldn't have hesitated. Work always came first, especially in a moment of professional vulnerability. But sitting here, waiting to see her mother after heart surgery, her priorities seemed suddenly, startlingly clear. Everything okay? Lisa asked, noting her expression. Work stuff, Tony said, already typing a response. At hospital with mother post-surgery. Can James brief you? He has all the details. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Almost immediately, her phone buzzed with Richard's reply. Family comes first. James can handle it. Give your mother our best. The simple acknowledgement of her personal life, the permission to prioritize family without penalty, brought unexpected tears to Tony's eyes. She blinked them away quickly but not before Lisa noticed. What's wrong? Her sister asked, concerned. Tony shook her head. Nothing actually. Just realizing some things aren't as complicated as I've made them. Before Lisa could question her further, a nurse appeared to inform them that Eleanor had been moved to ICU and they could visit briefly. They followed her through the maze of corridors to a quieter wing of the hospital, where their mother lay surrounded by monitoring equipment, looking small and fragile beneath the hospital blankets. She's still coming out of anesthesia, the nurse warned them. Don't expect much response. 5 minutes only, then you can come back later this afternoon. They approached the bed cautiously. Eleanor's eyes were closed, her breathing steady but shallow. Various tubes and wires connected her to machines that beeped and hummed reassuringly. Tony gently took her mother's hand, careful not to disturb the four-line. "We're here, Mom," she said softly. "Surgery went great. You're going to be fine." Eleanor's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and cloudy with medication. Her lips moved but no sound emerged. Then her eyes closed again, her body surrendering to the healing sleep it needed. "That's normal," the nurse assured them. "The anesthesia will take several hours to wear off completely. You should both go get some lunch, come back around 4. She'll be more aware then." Reluctantly they left the ICU, both stealing glances back at their mother as they went. In the hospital corridor, Lisa checked her watch. "I need to pick up the kids from school later," she said. "But I can come back after." "I'll stay," Tony offered immediately. "I'll be here when she wakes up properly." Lisa looked surprised but pleased. "Really? What about work?" Tony smiled ruefully. "Turns out the world doesn't end if I take a day off." Who knew? They parted in the hospital lobby with an awkward but sincere hug, promising to text with any updates. As Lisa headed for her car, Tony found herself alone again, unsure what to do with the hours stretching before her until she could return to the ICU. Her phone buzzed again. James this time. "How's your mom?" "Board meeting went well. Peterson fully back on board." Marcus looked like he swallowed a lemon. She smiled at the image, typing back, "Mom's out of surgery, doing well. Thanks for handling the board." "I owe you." His response came quickly, "You don't owe me anything. Glad your mom's okay. Need anything?" The simple offer of support with no strings attached, no expectation of repayment, touched something deep inside her. In her world of corporate transactions, where every favor came with a price, James's genuine kindness was as refreshing as it was unfamiliar. "Actually," she replied, surprising herself, "I have a few hours to kill before I can see Mom again. Company would be nice." It was a vulnerability she would never have allowed herself before. Admitting she didn't want to be alone, asking for companionship rather than practical assistance. She half expected him to make an excuse, to maintain the professional distance that she herself had always insisted upon. Instead, his answer came back immediately, "I'm already on my way." 20 minutes later, they sat in the hospital courtyard, sunshine warming them as they shared a lunch from the cafeteria. James had arrived bearing decent coffee from the shop across the street, a small but thoughtful gesture that Tony appreciated more than she could express. "So Marcus really looked upset?" she asked, sipping the life-saving brew. James grinned. "Furious. Richard made me present the entire Peterson situation. How we identified the issue, how we're adapting the strategy to their new direction. I might have mentioned that it was your insight that saved the account." "My insight?" Tony raised an eyebrow. "You're the one who figured out what Marcus was doing." "Team effort," James said easily. "The point is, Richard was impressed. And the board was clearly relieved we didn't lose Peterson." Tony felt a weight lift from her shoulders. At least her professional standing hadn't been irreparably damaged by the events of the past 2 days. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for stepping up like that." James shrugged, a little embarrassed by the gratitude. "Just doing my job." But they both knew it was more than that. He had gone above and beyond, protecting her reputation, supporting her personally and professionally during a crisis. It was the kind of loyalty that couldn't be demanded or purchased, only earned and freely given. They fell into comfortable conversation, carefully avoiding any discussion of the changing nature of their relationship. Instead, they talked about the Peterson campaign, about office gossip, about books they had both read. James made her laugh with his spot-on impression of Marcus's perpetually constipated expression, and she found herself sharing anecdotes about her early days at the company. It felt good, easy, natural, unforced. For someone who had spent years carefully maintaining her professional armor, the simple pleasure of relaxed conversation with someone who knew her at her worst and still respected her was profound. "You know," James said thoughtfully during a lull in the conversation, "you're different today." "Different how?" she asked, curious rather than defensive. He considered his words carefully. "More yourself, I think. Less guarded." The observation was perceptive enough to unsettle her slightly. Had she been living behind such a thick wall that even this small lowering of her defenses was so noticeable? "Near-death experiences will do that," she said lightly. "Mom's, not mine," she clarified when he looked concerned. "Still," he persisted gently, "it suits you. Being real." The simple compliment warmed her in a way that professional accolades never had. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'm trying." Their eyes met, and again Tony felt that shift in the air between them, that sense of possibility that both frightened and excited her. There was attraction there, undeniably, but also something deeper. Understanding, respect, genuine connection. Before either could speak, Tony's phone rang. Lisa, calling with a question about their mother's medication schedule. The moment dissolved, and perhaps it was for the best. Whatever was happening between them was too new, too fragile to define just yet. As Tony ended the call with her sister, she checked the time. "I should head back up soon," she said. "They said Mom would be more awake by 4. James nodded, gathering their lunch trash. "I should get back to the office anyway. Still have that revised proposal to work on." They walked back into the hospital together, stopping in the lobby where their paths would diverge, James to the parking garage, Tony to the ICU. "Will you be staying at my place again tonight?" James asked, his tone carefully neutral. The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. Tony considered her options. She could get a hotel room, the professional, sensible choice. She could stay at her mother's house, the family-oriented decision. Or she could accept James's hospitality again, continuing down this ambiguous path they had started. "If the offer's still open," she said finally. "Just until Mom's out of the woods." His smile was warm. "The offer's definitely still open. Text me when you're ready to leave and I'll come get you." As he turned to go, Tony called after him, "James?" He looked back, eyebrows raised in question. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." His expression softened. "You're welcome, Tony. For everything." She watched him walk away, aware that something fundamental had changed in her life. The trouble she had feared yesterday morning, professional embarrassment, potential scandal, damaged reputation, seemed almost trivial now. In its place was something far more complicated and potentially far more rewarding. The possibility of genuine connection, of lowered defenses, of being known and accepted as her full, flawed self. As she headed for the elevator to return to her mother's side, Tony realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever happened next, with her career, with her family, with James, she would face it honestly, openly, without hiding behind the walls she had built for protection but which had only succeeded in keeping her isolated. The elevator doors closed, carrying her upward toward her mother and whatever the future held. Eleanor Jackson opened her eyes properly around 5 p.m., consciousness gradually returning through the haze of anesthesia and pain medication. Tony, who had been sitting beside the bed for over an hour, noticed the change immediately. "Mom?" she said softly, leaning forward. "Can you hear me?" Eleanor's gaze focused slowly on her daughter's face. "Tony," she whispered, her voice raspy and weak. "You're still here." The surprise in those 3 simple words cut deep. How many times had Tony left prematurely, citing work emergencies? How many times had she chosen her career over these quiet moments of family connection? "Of course I'm here," Tony said, taking her mother's hand gently. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone cracked my chest open," Eleanor replied with a ghost of her usual dry humor. "Other than that, fantastic." Tony smiled, relief washing through her at her mother's lucidity. "Dr. Patel said the surgery went perfectly. The new valve is working great." Eleanor nodded slightly, then winced at the movement. "Where's Lisa?" "She went to pick up the kids from school. She'll be back later with Jake." Jake was Lisa's husband, a steady, kind man who had always treated Eleanor like his own mother. "They're all so happy you're okay." "And you?" Eleanor asked, studying Tony's face with surprising intensity for someone just out of major surgery. "Are you okay?" The question caught Tony off guard. Here was her mother, chest bandaged, tubes everywhere, having just undergone life-threatening surgery, and she was asking if Tony was okay. It was so typical of Eleanor, always putting her daughters first, always sensing when something was happening beneath the surface. "I'm fine," Tony said automatically, then caught herself. No more walls, she had promised herself. No more hiding. "Actually, I'm confused, I guess. A lot has happened in the last couple of days. Good things maybe, but scary too." Eleanor's hand tightened weakly around hers. "Tell me." So Tony did, speaking in low tones in the quiet of the ICU. She told her mother about the crisis at work and how James had helped her resolve it. About her conversation with Lisa and their tentative steps toward reconciliation. And finally, hesitantly, about the changing nature of her relationship with James, undefined, unacknowledged but undeniably real. "I don't know what I'm doing, Mom," she admitted. "He works for me. There are a million reasons why this is a bad idea. But when I'm with him I feel seen. Like I can be myself, not just the tough executive everyone expects." Eleanor listened without interruption, her eyes growing clearer as the medication fog gradually lifted. When Tony finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment, considering. "Life is short, baby," she said finally, gesturing weakly at the hospital equipment surrounding her. "Too short to let fear make your decisions for you." "It's not just fear," Tony protested. "There are real complications. Professional boundaries. Office politics. All external things," Eleanor pointed out. "What does your heart say?" The question was so direct, so unlike the careful cost-benefit analyses Tony usually applied to decisions, that she found herself without a ready answer. What did her heart say? She had spent so many years ignoring its whispers in favor of strategic career moves that she wasn't sure she could recognize its voice anymore. "I don't know," she admitted. "Yes, you do," Eleanor countered gently. "You're just afraid to listen." Before Tony could respond, a nurse entered to check Eleanor's vitals, breaking the intimate moment. By the time the medical staff finished their checks and adjustments, Lisa had arrived with Jake, and the conversation shifted to family matters and recovery plans. The evening passed in a blur of hospital routines, doctor updates, and family discussions. Lisa and Jake left around 8 p.m., needing to get home to their children. Tony stayed until visiting hours ended at 9, promising her drowsy mother she would return first thing in the morning. In the hospital lobby, she texted James as promised, "Ready whenever you are." His response came quickly, "Be there in 15. Had to finish something at the office." While waiting, Tony reflected on her mother's words. What does your heart say? The question haunted her, demanding an honesty she had long avoided. Her heart said she was drawn to James, to his kindness, his intelligence, his quiet strength. Her heart said she was tired of being alone, tired of holding everyone at arm's length. Her heart said maybe, just maybe, it was time to take a risk that had nothing to do with corporate strategy and everything to do with human connection. But her head reminded her of the complications, the potential fallout, the professional boundaries that existed for good reasons. Office relationships rarely ended well. Power dynamics made true consent questionable. If things went badly, she could lose a valuable employee or worse, face accusations of impropriety that could damage the career she had worked so hard to build. James's car pulled up, interrupting her circular thoughts. She slid into the passenger seat, suddenly aware of her exhaustion after the emotional roller coaster of the day. "How's your mom?" he asked immediately, genuine concern in his voice. "Better," Tony said with a tired smile. "Awake, talking, already giving me life advice." James chuckled. "Sounds like she's on the mend." "What kind of advice?" Tony hesitated, then decided on a diplomatic half-truth. "To stop letting fear make my decisions." "Wise woman," James commented, pulling away from the hospital. "You must take after her." The compliment warmed her, but she shook her head. "Not really. Mom leads with her heart. I lead with my head. Always have." "Nothing wrong with that," James said. "It's gotten you pretty far." "It has," Tony agreed, staring out at the darkening city. "But I wonder sometimes what I've missed along the way." The question hung in the air between them, neither willing to address its implications directly. Instead, James kept the conversation light as they drove, telling her about office happenings she had missed and the progress on the Peterson proposal. Back at his apartment, Tony found herself strangely comfortable, as if this were a familiar routine rather than a temporary arrangement born of unusual circumstances. James heated up leftover pasta for a late dinner, and they ate at his small kitchen counter, both too tired for formal dining. "I've been thinking," James said as they finished eating, "about the Peterson campaign." Tony nodded, relieved to be on safe, professional ground. "What about it?" "Their new direction emphasizes community engagement, right? Building trust through local initiatives." "Right," she confirmed. "That's the pivot we're adjusting for." James leaned forward, enthusiasm animating his tired features. "What if we took it a step further? Instead of just adapting our original approach, what if we completely embraced their new vision? Community-centered marketing with a focus on authentic relationships." The idea resonated with something inside Tony, not just professionally but personally as well. Authentic relationships. Wasn't that what she was struggling with in her own life? "I like it," she said, meaning it. "We could create hyper-local campaigns, showcase real customer stories, emphasize the human connection." "Exactly." James's eyes lit up. "It's not just about selling their product anymore. It's about building a community around their brand values." They brainstormed for nearly an hour, professional excitement temporarily overshadowing the personal undercurrents between them. This was familiar territory for both. The creative flow of ideas, the strategic thinking, the collaborative energy that made them such an effective team at work. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with them. Tony yawned mid-sentence and James laughed. "I think that's our cue to call it a night," he said. "We can pick this up tomorrow." He gathered blankets for the couch as he had the night before, and Tony gratefully accepted them. The day's emotions, fear for her mother, relief at the successful surgery, confusion about her feelings for James, had drained her completely. "Bathroom's all yours," James said, retreating to give her privacy for her evening routine. When she emerged from the bathroom in the oversized t-shirt he had lent her for sleeping, she found him making up the couch with careful attention to comfort. "You don't have to sleep on the couch again," she said impulsively. "I mean, it's your bed. I'm the one imposing." He looked up, surprised. "You're not imposing. And you need proper rest after the day you've had." Their eyes met, and that now familiar current of awareness passed between them. In the soft lamplight of his living room, with the day's professional masks set aside, they were just a man and a woman standing on the edge of something new. "Thank you," Tony said softly, "for everything these past few days." "You already thanked me," he reminded her with a gentle smile. "I know. But I mean it." She took a step closer, suddenly brave in her exhaustion. "You've seen me at my absolute worst and you're still here. Do you know how rare that is?" James's expression grew serious. "You don't have to be perfect, Tony. Not with me." The simple statement hit her with unexpected force. How long had she been trying to be perfect? Perfect executive, perfect daughter, perfect black woman in a white man's world, never showing weakness, never admitting doubt, never letting anyone close enough to see the cracks in her carefully constructed image. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, gesturing vaguely between them. "Do what?" he asked, though they both knew what she meant. "Be real with someone. Especially someone from work." She shook her head. "There are a million reasons why this is complicated." James nodded, not denying the truth of her words. "There are," he agreed. "But there are also reasons to try anyway." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "If you want to." The question hung in the air between them, offering possibility without pressure. Tony thought of her mother's words. "Life is short. Too short to let fear make your decisions." "I think I do," she whispered, surprising herself with the admission. "Want to try, I mean?" His smile was like sunrise, slow, warm, illuminating. "Then we'll figure it out together. No rush, no pressure. Just possibility." The tension of the moment broke as Tony yawned again, unable to suppress her exhaustion. James laughed softly. "But first sleep. You're dead on your feet." "Such flattery," she teased, grateful for the lighter tone. "Go to bed, Tony," he said gently. "We have time to figure everything else out." "We have time." The words followed her as she retreated to his bedroom, carrying the promise of something she hadn't allowed herself to want in years. Not just romance, but connection, understanding, partnership. As she drifted towards sleep in the now familiar bed, surrounded by the subtle scent of James's laundry detergent, Tony felt something she hadn't expected: peace. Whatever trouble she had found herself in 2 mornings ago when she woke in this same bed, it had led her somewhere she might never have gone otherwise, toward vulnerability, toward authenticity, toward the possibility of being truly known. And for the first time in a very long time, that didn't feel like trouble at all. It felt like the beginning of something real. The next morning found Tony waking naturally without an alarm, sunshine streaming through James's bedroom window. For a moment she lay still, savoring the rare feeling of having nowhere urgent to be. No early meetings, no crisis calls, no rush-hour commute. Just the hospital visit later to check on her mother, and perhaps some remote work on the Peterson proposal. She checked her phone. A text from Lisa confirmed that their mother had had a good night, and the doctors were pleased with her progress. The tight knot of worry in Tony's chest loosened slightly. One crisis at least was resolving itself positively. The smell of coffee drew her from the bedroom. She found James in the kitchen, already dressed for work in slacks and a button-down shirt, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He was humming to himself as he flipped something in a pan on the stove. "Morning," he said, looking up with a smile that made her heart do something ridiculous in her chest. "Coffee's ready. Breakfast in 5. "You're cooking again?" she asked, accepting the mug he handed her. "You're going to spoil me." "That's the plan," he replied lightly, though his eyes held her gaze a beat longer than necessary. They ate breakfast together. Omelets with vegetables and cheese, perfectly cooked and surprisingly delicious. The conversation flowed easily between personal and professional topics. It struck Tony how natural it felt, this domestic scene with a man she had known professionally for years but was only beginning to know personally. "I need to go into the office today," James said as they cleared the dishes together. "The Peterson team wants a preview of our revised approach." Tony nodded. "And I'll head to the hospital. Lisa says Mom's doing well, but I want to see for myself." "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "Will you be staying here again tonight? Or?" The question hung unfinished, offering her an easy exit if she wanted one. Yesterday's emotional conversations, the tentative acknowledgement of attraction between them, it would be simple enough to retreat now, to thank him for his hospitality and return to the safe distance of their professional relationship. But Tony found she didn't want the easy exit. "If that's okay," she said. "Just until Mom's moved out of ICU. Should only be another day or two." His smile told her everything she needed to know about how he felt about her decision. "More than okay. I'll pick you up from the hospital when you're ready." They parted outside his apartment building, James heading for the office, Tony for her car to drive to the hospital. The goodbye was slightly awkward, more than their usual professional nod, less than the hug or kiss that their evolving relationship might suggest. They settled on a brief touch of hands, a shared smile that promised more conversations to come. At the hospital, Tony found her mother sitting up in bed, looking remarkably improved from the previous day. The breathing tube was gone, replaced by a nasal cannula, and though Eleanor was clearly still in pain, her eyes were clear and alert. "You're looking better," Tony said, kissing her mother's cheek carefully. "Feeling better," Eleanor confirmed. "Doctor says I'm doing well. Might move me to a regular room tomorrow if everything stays on track." Lisa arrived shortly after, and the three Jackson women spent the morning together. The conversation flowed more easily than it had in years, old tension set aside in the wake of Eleanor's close call. They reminisced about family stories, laughed over shared memories, and planned for Eleanor's recovery at home. "I can take some time off," Tony offered, surprising both her mother and sister. "Help with the transition when you come home." Lisa's eyebrows shot up. "You? Take time off? Who are you and what have you done with my sister?" Tony laughed, acknowledging the truth in the teasing. "People change, Lisa. Or at least they can try to." Eleanor watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. "Speaking of change," she said, her voice still weak but her eyes sharp as ever, "how's that handsome assistant of yours?" Tony felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He's fine. Working on the Peterson proposal today." Eleanor hummed knowingly. "And that's all?" Lisa looked between them, confused. "What am I missing?" "Nothing," Tony said quickly. "Tony's been staying at her assistant's apartment," Eleanor informed Lisa with obvious delight. "The young man who took such good care of her when she was indisposed." Lisa's eyes widened. "The one who called me? James?" She turned to Tony with growing interest. "You're staying with him?" "It's not what you think," Tony insisted, though even to her own ears the protest sounded weak. "It's just convenient being close to the hospital." "Of course," Lisa nodded, her tone making it clear she didn't believe that for a second. "And the fact that he's gorgeous and clearly adores you has nothing to do with it." "He doesn't," Tony began, then stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence truthfully. "It's complicated," she said instead. "Because he works for you," Lisa guessed. Tony nodded. "That and I'm not exactly experienced at balancing personal and professional relationships." "Nobody is," Eleanor pointed out. "You figure it out as you go. The question is whether he's worth the effort." The directness of the question made Tony pause. Was James worth the potential complications, the risk to her carefully ordered life? The answer came more easily than she expected. "Yes," she said simply. "I think he is." The admission, spoken aloud for the first time, felt both terrifying and liberating. Lisa's expression softened from teasing to genuine happiness for her sister. Eleanor reached out to squeeze Tony's hand. "Then that's your answer," her mother said. "The rest is just details." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Tony found her thoughts returning to James throughout the day. To his kindness during her most embarrassing moment. His competence in handling the Peterson crisis. His genuine concern for her mother. His patience as she navigated her conflicted feelings. Yes, she decided. He was definitely worth the effort. Around midday, her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Peterson team loved our new direction. Contract renewal secured. Well done to you and James." Relief and pride surged through her. One professional crisis averted, at least. She forwarded the message to James with her own addition. "We did it. Congratulations." His response came quickly. "Your vision. I just helped implement it. Proud to be on your team. The message warmed her, not just for the professional acknowledgement but for the way it navigated their evolving personal relationship without presumption. On your team. It was both true and carefully respectful of the boundaries they were still defining. How's your mom doing? He added in a second text. Better, she replied. May move out of ICU tomorrow. That's great news. Still need a ride later? Yes, please. Around 6. See you then. The simple exchange, mundane as it was, felt significant somehow, the beginning of a new pattern in her life, one that included someone who cared about both her professional success and her personal concerns. Someone who checked in, who offered help, who celebrated her victories and supported her during challenges. It was both foreign and deeply appealing. The afternoon passed in a blur of hospital routines and family conversations. Lisa left to pick up her kids from school, promising to return with dinner for everyone. Eleanor dozed off and on, still weak from surgery but clearly improving. Tony used the quiet moments to answer work emails and review the updated Peterson proposal that James had sent over. At 6 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text. I'm in the lobby whenever you're ready. She said goodbye to her mother, promising to return in the morning, and headed downstairs. James was waiting by the main entrance, still in his work clothes but with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, looking tired but pleased. How was your day? He asked as they walked to his car. Good, she said honestly. Mom's doing better. Lisa and I actually had civil conversations. Practically a miracle. He laughed. Family reconciliation and the Peterson account secured. Not bad for a Wednesday. Not bad at all, she agreed as they settled into the car. How was the meeting? Great actually. They loved the community engagement approach. Especially when I told them it was your idea. Our idea, she corrected. We developed it together. James glanced over at her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Co-creation. I like it. The double meaning wasn't lost on either of them. They were co-creating something here, too, something undefined but full of possibility. Back at his apartment, they fell into what was becoming a comfortable evening routine. James changed into casual clothes while Tony took a quick shower. They prepared dinner together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with surprising ease. They ate at his dining table, sharing the details of their days, transitioning seamlessly between work discussions and personal conversation. After dinner, James pulled out his guitar as promised, settling on the couch with the instrument in his lap. Fair warning, he said with a self-deprecating smile. I wasn't kidding about being mediocre. But he wasn't mediocre at all. His fingers moved confidently over the strings, picking out a gentle melody that filled the small apartment with warmth. He played without singing, just instrumental pieces that ranged from folk to classical, each revealing another layer of who he was beyond the efficient assistant she had known for years. Tony watched from the armchair opposite, a glass of sparkling water in hand, mesmerized not just by the music but by the man himself. In the soft evening light, with his guard down and his attention focused on something he loved, James was beautiful in a way she had never allowed herself to notice before. That was lovely, she said when he finally set the guitar aside. Hardly mediocre. He looked pleased but embarrassed by the praise. Just a hobby. Helps me decompress after work sometimes. You have depths, James Reynolds, she said softly. So do you, Tony Jackson, he countered. You just don't let many people see them. The observation was perceptive enough to make her pause. I'm not very good at that, she admitted. Letting people in. I've noticed, he said, but his tone was gentle, without judgment. For what it's worth, I think the people who get to see the real you are pretty lucky. The compliment touched her deeply. Even when the real me is a drunken mess who throws up in your bathroom? She asked, trying to lighten the suddenly intense mood. He laughed. Even then. Maybe especially then. It's easy to admire the polished executive everyone sees at work. It takes something more to care about the human being underneath. Care. The word hung in the air between them, simple but profound. That's what this was, Tony realized. Beyond attraction, beyond professional respect. James cared about her. The whole person, not just the successful career woman or the potential romantic interest. And she was surprised to recognize, cared about him too. Deeply. It's getting late, she said finally, reluctant to end the evening but aware they both had early mornings ahead. I should let you get some sleep. He nodded, equally reluctant. The couch is all yours. Unless. He let the sentence trail off, and Tony felt her heart rate quicken. Unless, she prompted softly. James met her gaze directly. Unless you'd prefer not to sleep alone tonight, he said carefully. Just sleep, he added quickly. Nothing else. Just company. The offer touched her in its simplicity and respect. Not a seduction, not a presumption, just the recognition that sometimes, after emotional days and major life events, human connection was its own form of comfort. I'd like that, she said honestly. Just sleep. Later, lying beside him in the darkness of his bedroom, Tony felt an unfamiliar peace settle over her. James kept a respectful distance, but his presence was a comfort nonetheless. The sound of his breathing, the subtle warmth of another person nearby, the implicit promise that she wasn't facing her challenges alone. As she drifted toward sleep, she realized something important. The trouble she had feared when she woke up in this same bed 3 mornings ago had transformed into something entirely different. Not catastrophe but possibility. Not scandal but connection. Not isolation, but the beginning of a partnership that might span both professional and personal realms. Whatever challenges lay ahead, navigating workplace dynamics, balancing her career with her renewed family connections, defining this tentative relationship with James, she would face them with something she hadn't had before: support. Not because she was weak or incapable of handling things alone, but because life was richer, fuller, more meaningful when shared with people who truly saw and valued her. She fell asleep with that thought, James's steady breathing beside her like a promise of things to come. The next 4 days established a new rhythm for Tony's life. Mornings began with breakfast shared with James before they went their separate ways. He to the office, she to the hospital. Days were spent with her mother, whose recovery proceeded steadily until she was moved to a regular room and then, by Sunday, cleared for discharge the following day. Evenings brought Tony and James back together, sharing meals, conversations, and increasingly comfortable physical proximity. They slept side by side each night, the initial awkwardness giving way to natural intimacy, an arm draped over a waist, fingers interlaced in sleep, the unconscious seeking of warmth and connection that spoke more honestly than their still cautious waking interactions. By mutual unspoken agreement, they hadn't discussed what would happen once Eleanor was released from the hospital. Would Tony return to her own apartment? Would their relationship continue evolving, or would they retreat to professional boundaries once the extraordinary circumstances ended? The question hung between them, important but unaddressed, as Sunday evening approached. Tony arrived at James's apartment later than usual, having stayed at the hospital to help Lisa prepare for their mother's discharge the next day. She found James in the kitchen, music playing softly as he prepared dinner. "Something smells amazing," she said, dropping her purse on the counter and slipping off her shoes with a grateful sigh. He turned with a smile that still made her heart skip. "How's your mom?" "Good. Ready to go home. Complaining about hospital food and fussing about being babied," Tony reported with a fond shake of her head. "So, back to normal." "That's great," James said sincerely. "You must be relieved." She nodded, moving to help him with dinner preparations without being asked, their movements around the kitchen now familiar and coordinated. "I am. Scared too though. Heart surgery is serious business even when it goes well." "That's why you're taking time off to help with her recovery?" "Part of the reason," Tony acknowledged. "The other part is, I don't want to miss any more time with her. Life's too short, you know?" James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know." He hesitated, then asked, "Have you talked to Richard about the time off?" "This morning," she confirmed. 2 weeks, starting tomorrow." He was surprisingly supportive. Said family comes first, especially after a health scare. "The company won't fall apart without you for 2 weeks," James assured her. "And I'll keep you updated on anything important." The I rather than we caught Tony's attention. "You're not taking time off too?" He smiled ruefully. "Some of us aren't quite as indispensable as you. Besides, somebody has to keep an eye on Marcus while you're gone." The reminder of their workplace reality, her senior position, his subordinate role, the corporate politics that continued regardless of their personal situation, sobered the moment slightly. "About that," Tony said, setting down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. "We should probably talk about this." She gestured between them. "What happens when real life resumes?" James nodded, his expression growing serious. "We should." He turned off the stove, giving the conversation his full attention. "What are you thinking?" Tony took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "I care about you, James. These past few days have shown me that what's between us is special. Something I want to explore." She met his eyes directly. "But I'm also your boss. There are HR policies, potential conflicts of interest, office gossip." I could transfer to another department, he suggested immediately. Or look for a position elsewhere in the company. She shook her head. I don't want that. You're valuable where you are. We work well together. We do, he agreed. But if it's a choice between working together professionally or exploring what we could be personally. He let the sentence hang. Is that the only choice? Tony asked. Either/or. James considered this. Maybe not. What if we disclosed the relationship to HR? Followed whatever protocols they have for workplace relationships? It might mean some adjustments to reporting structures, but we could still work together. The suggestion was sensible, pragmatic, and terrifying in its commitment. Disclosing a relationship to HR made it official, documented, a matter of corporate record. It was a far cry from the private bubble they had created these past few days. Is that what you want? She asked carefully. An official relationship? His expression softened. Tony, I've admired you for 2 years. Respected your intelligence, your determination, your leadership. But these past few days, seeing you with your family, watching you navigate personal challenges with the same grace you bring to professional ones, I've fallen for the whole person, not just the impressive executive. The confession, simple and direct, touched her deeply. I've fallen for you too, she admitted, the words easier to say than she had expected. And that scares me. Why? He asked gently. She struggled to articulate feelings she had kept buried for so long. Because I don't know how to do this. Balance work and personal life. Be vulnerable with someone who also sees me professionally. I've spent years building walls, James. Protecting myself. Proving I belong in that boardroom. I know, he said, stepping closer, taking her hands in his. And I would never ask you to compromise that. Your career matters. Your professional reputation matters. But you matter too, Tony. Not just what you achieve but who you are. His understanding, his respect for both her ambition and her humanity, broke something open inside her. Tears she had been holding back for days, through her mother's surgery, through the professional crisis, through this evolving relationship, finally spilled over. I'm afraid of messing this up, she whispered. James pulled her gently into his arms, holding her as she cried. We might, he acknowledged honestly. Relationships are hard. Work is complicated. Putting them together is doubly so. But I think what we could build together is worth the risk. He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. Don't you? In his gaze, Tony saw everything she had been too afraid to want: partnership, understanding, support that didn't diminish her strength but complemented it. The answer came from her heart rather than her carefully calculating mind. Yes, she said simply. It's worth the risk. His smile blossomed slowly, lighting his entire face. He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips, silently asking permission. Tony closed the distance between them, their first kiss gentle and questioning at first, then deepening as certainty replaced doubt. His hands cradled her face with tender reverence. Hers clutched the front of his shirt, anchoring herself to this moment, this choice, this man who had seen her at her worst and still looked at her like she was remarkable. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. So, he said softly, we're doing this? We're doing this, she confirmed, a smile spreading across her face. God help us. He laughed, the joy in the sound infectious. We'll figure it out, he promised. The HR stuff, the work boundaries, all of it. Tomorrow, Tony decided, suddenly unwilling to spend any more of their evening on practicalities. Tonight is just for us. Dinner was delayed, then nearly forgotten altogether as they lost themselves in the connection they had been building toward for days. Later, much later, they lay tangled together in James's bed, the relationship now fully crossed into physical intimacy that matched the emotional intimacy they had been cultivating. You know, James murmured against her hair, when I helped you home that night, I never imagined we'd end up here. Tony laughed softly. If you had, I might have questioned your intentions. My intentions were entirely honorable, he protested with mock indignation. And now, she teased, propping herself up on an elbow to look at him. His expression grew serious. Now my intentions are entirely serious, he said quietly. I want to see where this goes, Tony. All the way. The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. I want that too, she admitted. It won't be easy, but I think we could be really good together. We already are, he pointed out, pulling her back into his arms. The rest is just logistics. As they drifted toward sleep, Tony reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past week. From professional embarrassment to personal revelation. From fearing scandal to embracing possibility. From isolation to connection. The trouble she had feared that first morning had transformed into the most unexpected gift. A second chance at balance, at wholeness, at a life that included both professional fulfillment and personal joy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, disclosing their relationship at work, helping her mother's recovery, rebuilding her family connections, learning how to navigate romance alongside career. But for the first time in years, Toni felt equal to those challenges, not because she would face them alone with her customary independence, but because she had chosen to allow others to support her journey. As sleep claimed her, Toni's last thought was one of gratitude, for her mother's improving health, for her tentative reconciliation with Lisa, for the man whose steady breathing beside her promised partnership in all that lay ahead. The trouble, it turned out, had been worth it. 6 months later, Toni stood in the doorway of her mother's kitchen, watching Eleanor direct Lisa's teenage daughter in the fine art of pie crust preparation. The Jackson family Thanksgiving gathering was in full swing, the house filled with the chaotic warmth of multiple generations. Lisa's 3 children, Jake's parents, and a few close family friends who had become honorary relatives over the years. "You're hovering," James murmured in her ear, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "I'm supervising," Toni corrected with a smile, accepting the glass he offered. "Big difference." His skeptical tone made her laugh. "Your mom's fine, Toni. She's been fine for months." "I know," she sighed. "Old habits die hard." James slipped an arm around her waist, a casual intimacy that still gave her a little thrill after 6 months together. "She's not the only one who's had a remarkable recovery, you know." Toni raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "6 months ago, you would have been checking your phone every 5 minutes during a family gathering, itching to get back to work," he pointed out gently. "Now look at you, fully present, not even bringing your laptop for the weekend." "I'm evolving," she acknowledged with a smile. "Slowly." "Not that slowly," he countered. Executive Vice President Toni Jackson, learning to delegate, taking weekends off, maintaining a successful romantic relationship. He shook his head in mock amazement. "If you'd told me a year ago, I wouldn't have believed it." She nudged him playfully. "Don't act so surprised. I'm very accomplished once I set my mind to something." "That you are," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. The past 6 months had indeed brought remarkable changes to Toni's life. After her 2 weeks helping with Eleanor's recovery, she had returned to work with new perspective and priorities. The Peterson campaign had been a runaway success, leading to her promotion to executive vice president, a position that, ironically, made her relationship with James less problematic from an HR perspective, as he now reported to her department rather than directly to her. Their disclosure to human resources had caused less disruption than Toni had feared. A few procedural adjustments, some knowing smiles from colleagues who had suspected their attraction long before they acknowledged it themselves, and work had continued with minimal drama. Even Marcus had backed off his undermining tactics, whether from respect for Toni's handling of the Peterson crisis or from recognition that she now had powerful support both professionally and personally. Most surprising to Toni had been the positive impact on her career rather than the setback she had feared. Her new balance, her willingness to delegate and collaborate, her increased emotional intelligence, all had made her a more effective leader, not less. Richard had even mentioned the possibility of COO in her future, a position she had long desired but now viewed with healthier perspective. "Aunt Toni." "James?" Lisa's youngest son called from the living room. "Mom says dinner in 10 minutes. "We'll be right there," Toni called back, still marveling at how easily James had been absorbed into her family. Her mother adored him, Lisa treated him like another brother-in-law, and the kids had been won over by his guitar playing and terrible dad jokes. "Should we tell them tonight?" James asked quietly, his eyes searching hers. Toni touched the ring that now adorned her left hand, still new enough to feel foreign against her skin. James had proposed just 3 days ago, on a quiet evening at home rather than with grand gestures. Exactly right for the relationship they had built on authenticity rather than performance. "After dinner," she decided. "When everyone's together." He nodded, squeezing her hand. "Nervous? About telling my family we're engaged?" "No." She smiled. "Mom's been dropping hints for months. I think she'll claim credit for the whole relationship." "As she should," James laughed. Her life advice that first day in the hospital was pretty pivotal. Toni nodded, remembering her mother's words. "Life is short, baby. Too short to let fear make your decisions for you. She'll never let me hear the end of it." "Speaking of your mom," James said, glancing over Tony's shoulder with an amused expression. "I think she's on to us." Tony turned to find Eleanor watching them with knowing eyes, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Her health had improved dramatically over the past 6 months. She was back to her community activities, her church volunteering, her gentle but persistent meddling in her daughter's lives. "You two lovebirds planning to join us for dinner, or should we start without you?" Eleanor called, her tone teasing. "We're coming, Mom," Tony assured her, taking James's hand and leading him toward the dining room where the extended family was gathering. The table was crowded, the food abundant, the conversation flowing freely between family updates, gentle teasing, and occasional deeper topics. Tony sat beside James, their knees touching beneath the table, and marveled at how different this Thanksgiving felt from any she had experienced in recent memory. In previous years she had always been partly present, mentally checking her phone for work emails, calculating when she could politely leave to return to the office, maintaining the careful distance that had defined her relationship with her family for so long. Now she was fully here, engaged in Lisa's stories about her children's school adventures, debating movie recommendations with Jake, helping her mother remember the name of an old family friend, her hand occasionally finding James's beneath the table in silent communication. After dinner, as the family moved to the living room for dessert and coffee, Tony caught James's eye. He nodded slightly, understanding her silent signal. They had planned this moment, rehearsed the words they would say, but now that it had arrived, Tony found herself unexpectedly emotional. James seemed to sense her hesitation. "I can start," he offered quietly. She nodded gratefully, taking a deep breath as James gently tapped his spoon against his coffee cup to gain everyone's attention. "If we could have your attention for a moment," he said, his voice steady but threaded with obvious joy. "Tony and I have an announcement to make." The room quieted, expectant faces turning toward them. Eleanor's expression was particularly knowing, her eyes already glistening with anticipated tears. "As you all know," James continued, "the past 6 months have been, well, life-changing for both of us. What started with a rather embarrassing night, gentle laughter rippled through the room, the story of their unconventional beginning, now family lore, has grown into the most meaningful relationship of my life." He turned to Tony, love evident in his gaze. "Your turn," he said softly. Tony smiled, finding her voice and her confidence in the support of his presence beside her. "3 nights ago," she announced, "this wonderful man asked me to marry him." She held up her left hand, the modest but elegant ring catching the light. "And I said yes." The room erupted in cheers and exclamations. Eleanor was the first to reach them, enfolding them both in a tearful embrace. "I knew it," she whispered fiercely. "I knew from that first day in the hospital that you two were meant for each other." Lisa was next, genuine happiness for her sister evident in her enthusiastic hug. "About time," she teased. "We were taking bets on when he'd propose." The celebration continued into the evening with impromptu toasts, requests for wedding details they hadn't yet determined, and increasingly outlandish stories about how they had fallen in love, each family member apparently claiming some credit for the match. Later, as the gathering began to wind down, Tony and James slipped outside for a moment of quiet on the back porch. The November night was cool but not cold, stars visible in the clear sky above. "That went well," James observed, wrapping his arm around her shoulders as they settled onto the porch swing. "Better than I expected," Tony agreed. "Though I think my mother is already planning a wedding twice the size we discussed." James laughed. "We can handle it. We're good at navigating complicated situations together." "That we are," she acknowledged, leaning into his warmth. "Who would have thought that waking up hungover in your apartment would lead to this?" "Not me," he admitted. "Though I can't say I didn't hope for something between us even back then. Just not quite so dramatically." Tony smiled, remembering the panic she had felt that morning 6 months ago. "I was so sure my life was falling apart," she mused. "That I had ruined everything, my reputation, my career, my dignity. And instead, I found everything I didn't know I was missing." She turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek gently. "I found you. I found a way back to my family. I found balance I never thought was possible." James turned his head to kiss her palm. "And I found the woman behind the executive mask. The real Tony Jackson, brilliant, compassionate, brave. Worth every bit of trouble and then some." "Trouble?" she echoed with a soft laugh. "That's what I thought I was in that morning. The worst kind of trouble. And now I know better," she said simply. "It wasn't trouble at all. It was the beginning of everything good." James smiled, pulling her closer on the swing. To good trouble then, he murmured against her hair. And new beginnings. To new beginnings, she agreed, tilting her face up for his kiss. Inside the house, family chatter continued, the sounds of togetherness spilling out into the night. Tony's phone remained unchecked in her purse, work concerns set aside for the weekend. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, wedding plans, work projects, the ongoing balance of personal and professional lives. But tonight, right now, everything was exactly as it should be. As they returned to the warmth of the family gathering, hand in hand, Tony reflected on how far she had come from that panicked awakening in James's apartment. The trouble she had feared had transformed into the gift she hadn't known she needed. The courage to be vulnerable, to connect, to integrate all parts of herself into a whole life rather than compartmentalized perfection. Sometimes, she thought with a smile as James squeezed her hand, the best things in life begin with a little trouble.